be a deep thinker. Sue asked, why did Jesus say on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? What does it mean? What happened to Jesus to say that?
Because God did not look upon him as sin. Those 3 days, Christ himself had to trust his Father. He couldn't hear him. He couldn't see him. Almost all the rest of the time he had been on the earth, he would go meet with his Father. He went into the mountains to meet with him. He would hear him all the time. But from that moment, and I have to say this to you, Christ knew that would happen. He already knew. He knew before he came and died on the cross. He knew these things would happen. He knew he had to agree to drink that cup. He knew when they brought it, he was going to have to drink that cup.
Well, and I think they're asking then if that's true, and he knew, and I accept that. I think we accept that. Why did he say, why are you forsaking me, when he already knew it was going to happen? You see what I mean? I think that's what the question is.
It was in the moment of him having to actually experience that. Okay. And I think God required of him what he would of us. If we didn't hear God at one time, that doesn't mean you don't trust him. Mm-hmm. But he did know when he came. It was harder, just like in the garden when he said, if it's possible, can this cup be taken from me? See, he knew he was going to have to drink it. He knew why he would drink it. He already said yes before he came, that he would do all of that. But in the moment of having to say yes, it was harder on his flesh, I think, than he ever thought it would be. And yet he also knew what the outcome, he had to trust his Father in the outcome of all of this, that even though I can't hear you or see you, I still have to trust you that all the things you said to me will be fulfilled. So when his spiritual body, Christ didn't wander around forever thinking that. He got to business. He got right down to business. When his spiritual body left the cross, it went into Abraham's bosom. He was with the thief that day in paradise. He preached the gospel to all of them. He also knew he had to cross over to hell. He knew that he had to be in hell for that amount of time. But he also knew the day would come on the third day that his Father would raise him up. So it was that from not hearing his voice.
And so if I'm thinking, to me, there's a certain amount of encouragement in that, in this way. There have been times in my life where in my head, I knew God would never abandon me. But in my heart and emotions, I felt so abandoned. And I would say, why have you abandoned me, when I knew here in my head that he hadn't? Can people take a certain amount of encouragement by, if Christ could feel that way, then I shouldn't be condemned for feeling that way?
I think that there's probably a lot of people who have felt that way at some time in their life. And yet, even Christ says he will never leave us nor forsake us. And he can honestly say that because he trusted the Father. He had to trust the Father in that time. But the Father did everything he said he would do. He didn't really abandon him, but he had to, on his own, make decisions. He had to make decisions himself. And that's what that whole thing was about. God didn't hold his hand through all of that, everybody. Christ himself had experienced it emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And yet he never gave up hope that his Father would come for him. I'm sure Satan thought the Father forgot him and wasn't going to come for him.
Yeah.
And yet we have to say this, he couldn't have been too overwrought this is while he's on the cross, right? That he says this is while he's on the cross. But once he leaves, his spiritual body leaves that cross, it's a whole different thing going on. Christ immediately goes into Abraham's bosom. He's preaching the gospel. That doesn't sound like he's after that time had passed, after those few moments had passed. That doesn't seem to me like he was heartbroken or had felt abandoned if he's down in Abraham's bosom, celebrating with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and all of those, sharing the truth about the gospel so they could say yes to him. I think that things started to change for him the moment he was out of the physical body. I think that all started to change while he was in his physical body. He said those words. His emotions were going crazy. He knew that the Father had to. He knew, even though he said that question, he really did know that he had to be on his own and make decisions on his own, because the Father would be in heaven. He would be down below having to make his decisions.
Well, and Psalms 22 is interesting because Jesus was effectively quoting the entire psalm on on the cross. That's where it was written that he would have read those words, my God, why have you forsaken me? At the end of Psalms 22, it says, which means Jesus would have said, at least in his heart, nevertheless, I will praise you in the assembly, which is how Psalms 22 ends. So we can know what was in his heart. He said as part of the psalm that Jesus would have had memorized, why have you forsaken me? He was quoting the word. And at the end, he said, nevertheless, I will praise you in assembly. So I think we can even know that. And it also gives me comfort to know that I can actually know in my head that God would never abandon me, but I would still have to, I would just feel compelled to express, why have you abandoned me for so long? You know?
Yes, because he was so used to hearing him all the time. I mean, from the time he knew who he was on the earth as a child, when he knew that he was the Father's son, and he said that to Mary and Joseph, I must be about my Father's business. From that moment, I'm sure he heard the Father. He probably heard him all the time.
Yeah.
And so you come to this point in your life, in the flesh, in his flesh, where he had to experience not being with him. And I'm sure that probably was kind of overwhelming to him, just like when he had to make the decision. He died in the garden first to himself, okay, people, when he said, not my will, but your will be done. And after that, once his spiritual body left his physical body, it started to change immediately for him. To get to go down there and see all those great men and women from the past who were faithful to God, to get to see them, to preach the gospel to them, that was a plus. I would say that would be a plus for him. Having to go over and wait in hell for a few days, that probably might not have been the best thing. But even still, he knew on the third day, he knew that he knew, without seeing it happen yet, knew it would happen. And that's